Hey everybody, my name is Mark, and today I'd like to talk to you about my Chavez Knives Redencion 229 integral. All right, so the Redencion 229 integral. This knife is kind of a little brick house. This is a heavy knife. This is 6.5, 6.7 ounces or so. The blade length, total blade length, is probably about 3.6, I think. But it has a pretty large sharpening choil, and so that's going to cut down on your usable, cutting edge. But it's still very usable. This knife actually this is not a PVD coated blade. This is actually DLC. But then it got customized by way of knife, and so the handle or frame was done in full DLC also. So this is kind of a one-off, totally custom, full DLC knife, and it's an integral, so I kind of like that. You're not going to see these around much unless someone's had theirs customized. So this had the skull clip on it when I got it. This was, extra in the package, and it had not undergone any customization. So this is just a dark black stone-washed non-DLC finish. The skull clip was finished in the same DLC, and it looked fine. It looks good enough, It matches the rest of the knife perfectly, and they did a fine job applying the coating. The only thing is, I like a little contrast, and so I put the other stock kind of plain clip back on there just to give it like a little pop. So I've got a shiny DLC, and then I've got kind of a stone-washed matte black, and to me that actually looks better. I love the way that looks. It actually kind of matches the milling inside the lock bar, and so I like the way that looks quite a bit. And it also matches the grind on the blade. So, the flats are like the bright DLC, and then the grind on the blade and the swedge matches the pocket clip perfectly. And so that's what I'm into. I like the way that looks a lot. I may send the skull pocket clip back out for customizing. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. I may get, because it's a skull and it's, kind of, Mexican heritage or whatever, I may get some scroll work done, like laser etching, and have it look like, a scroll, maybe put, a Hispanic theme in there. So I'm kind of thinking about that, but I just got this knife in, and I'm really happy with it. And that's surprising because I wasn't right out of the box. And it's not because of any fault of the knife or quality or anything like that. It's basically because the seller, I think he is either reselling other people's knives, friends or whatever, and just kind of running them through his account. But when I opened the box on this knife, this lock bar insert was completely loose to the point where there was not only no lockup, but you could barely deploy the blade because the lock bar insert was just rattling around and out of position so much that it would barely let the blade by. So that was kind of a bummer. And then the thumb studs, which I think are an issue that I've read about on Chavez knives. Sometimes out of the box, the thumb studs are just kind of loose, and it's just kind of a feature of the knife. So these were indeed loose to the point where they were rattling. So when I got this out of the box, it was kind of a rattle trap, and I even commented to the guy because it was a trade, and I had made sure that the knife that I was putting up for trade was completely tip-top. I would never send a knife with some kind of known issues or anything like that to someone else. That's just not the way I do things. The guy was, very apologetic, and that's great, but it seemed like the main issue and the thing that he was really concerned about was just making sure that I didn't ding his review status. And so, I gave him his 5 stars, and I told him, enjoy the knife that I spent so much money on preparing before I sent it to you. And I'm going to kind of go through your knife and make sure that there's not some kind of problem with it. So that was a little disappointing, but I was able to get everything fixed. And there weren't any strip screws or anything. And so, it all ended up fine. But today we're going to disassemble this knife because I want to see what kind of bearings it's running on. As I mentioned, if they're, open cage bearing system, I'm not really into that. So they're fine, but I'll probably end up getting skips for this if it is open cage. So we're going to take a look at this and see kind of what's going on. It's not going to take very long. I'm just going to pop it apart. And I will say before we start that the pivot system on this, because it's an integral, the lock bar or the locking pin that the blade rests against when it's deployed is kind of captured and hidden under this little teardrop shape. So right under this area right here, probably when we take this apart, we're going to see the end of the lock bar there, or the locking pin. And that's kind of how they do that. It's almost exactly the same as the We Knives One and Only. That is exactly how they do theirs, except at the end, they hide everything with some scales that cover 100% of the knife, basically. And so there is no visible hardware at all. You can't see any of that. You can't see the pivot or any body screws, really, or anything like that. So that's kind of the way they do it. So with this knife, we're not going to take the log bar insert out. We don't really need to. I just want to get in there and see the pivot system and find out what's going on. So we are going to take this pivot screw out, and it looks like that side is captured. So we're going to move to the other side. And so this knife has a captured pivot on the lock side, which is, I see that sometimes, but usually if it's captured, it's going to be captured on the show side. And then the lock side is the one that you would, take the pivot out of, or take the screw out of, and then slide the pivot out the other way. So what we're going to do is slide this pivot out and see what happens. So the pivot just dropped out, and before I take the blade out, I'll go ahead and show you that. So this is the pivot system on the 229 integral, and you can see that that little cover there for the lock bar pin is kind of stays on there. It does have a shoulder on the pivot, and you can also see that there is no, because they have the shoulder there that is kind of built in, and this is recessed into the frame of the knife. So that is what captures the pivot. So there is no D shape or anything else on this pivot. It's just basically this rests into the frame, and it can't swing because it's not round, and it has this built in. So that's how that's working. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to relieve the tension on the lock bar, and you can kind of look down there and see there is in fact like washers on either side of the bearing, it looks like, or at least this side. And then that little silver circle that you see, that is the blade stop pin. And we're going to relieve the tension, and we're just going to slide this out. And that is kind of all there is to it. These are really easy to take apart. It makes a lot of people nervous, but there's really nothing to it. So these are in fact an open cage bearing system, and you can see where it sits there in the recess of that blade, and you can see the hole for the detent ball. And this one is a ramped detent, so you can see the little ramp right here. So the detent is going to rest off of the blade, and then when you deploy the blade, it's going to ride up on that ramp. You can see where that very sharp track that you see there, right there for the detent ball to ride on. So that is not caused by the detent ball. It is not, carving a groove or anything like that. So when you have a coated blade, and this is factory coated, if this blade had been bright and I sent it somewhere to get refinished, you would see that they would mask off this entire area, and you would see like this big circle that kind of covers, the detent ball area and the track, and it would come out, extend a little past that, and that would not be, blasted at all or touched in the refinish process. And then everything forward of that on the blade would be. So they protect that. But because this is done at the factory, and this is a factory applied finish, when they're done, they go ahead and just remove the finish on the blade in that area. And they don't have to remove a big area because it's a very small detent ball. So it gives it a place just on fresh steel. It's going to make it a lot smoother. If that ball, even though DLC is a very smooth coating, it just gives it a nice, super smooth finish to ride on and find its way into its detent hole. So that is kind of what you're seeing there. So I'm going to drop this bearing out of here, and we're going to kind of clean this up a little bit. And then we're going to measure those bearings, which is kind of the whole reason that I'm doing this. We're going to kind of take a look at it. I'm not sure why these thumb studs are always loose on a Chavez. It seems like I've read that quite a few times. So, each one of these thumb studs has a little Torx head in it, and so you can tighten from both sides. Maybe that's why. Maybe whoever's making this knife for Chavez, I'm sure that this is not an in-house, custom build. By this time in his line of knives, he's got to find, I'm sure it's a Chinese OEM, just like many, many other knives. So I'm not sure why that's always loose, but this is an M390 blade, and it is DLC coated Tonto, and it is very sharp. It's a compound grind, so you can see that little grind up there. And then it has a really nice swedge on the top. There is really big jimping. So these are very wide open jimping areas, but they are kind of aggressive. So the edges at the top, they're not sharp, but they are, like, you can feel them. So if you put your thumb there and put pressure down, it's really not going to go anywhere unless you want it to. So all in all, I really like the blade shape. I'm getting used to Tontos, and so I like it quite a bit. So we're going to continue just kind of wiping everything down, and I'm going to measure these bearings real quick, and then we're going to throw this back together. I'm going to wipe the pivot off, and I'm also going to drop these. I'm not getting that one in there. And that one is not coming out. So I'm just gonna use my magnet and kind of slide that washer out of its little recess, just so I can kind of get in there and take a look and see what's going on, make sure everything's clean. And that popped into the other recess. There we go. So now this handle, except for the stop bar pin, is, I can actually take that out, I guess. So we're going to grab that stop bar pin right there with a magnet, if it'll come out. Nope. So that's a pretty tight tolerance hole that stop bar pin is slid through. I could pop it out of there, but I'm not going to try real hard. I don't want to scratch the knife or anything like that. But except for the lock bar insert and that little pin, this is kind of what you get. So this is a integral, it's a single piece mill, and I actually like it quite a bit. I like these little details they left back here. Those look pretty good. But yeah, this is very clean. The inside here, where at the bottom, it may be kind of hard to see, but that is very smooth in there. at the bottom. And it's an integral, so there is no internal milling on the sides. And that's probably one of the reasons it's so heavy. So all in all, not too bad. Got my washers here. So I'm gonna grab my handy little cheat card and we are going to measure these bearings. So these are gonna be a 1/16 bearing, and it is going to be a 3/16 pivot. So if I was going to order bearings from Skiff, I would order a 3/16 by 1/16. And then I think the only choice to make is in that size, they may have a difference in the number of ceramic balls that are in the cage. So, you know, you can get as many as you like, really, as many as the cage will fit. And Skiffs go all the way up to, the highest I've seen is like a 22 ball bearing on either side. And that's a lot. They make them, you know, for larger knives. And when you want to spread out that force on the pivot from a heavy blade or whatever, you know, you're going to need all those. So now we're going to put them back together. And what I'm going to do, because this is an integral and I'm trying to get these washers back in there, the bearings I can kind of put on the blade after I lubricate them and just hold them and slide them in to the end here of the handle. But there are recesses on the inside for those washers. And at least one of those is going to be kind of tough because, you know, it's upside down. I could hold it like this, I guess, and just hope that they stay out of the way of the blade and the bearings as I put them in. But what I'm going to do is kind of put a light sheen of oil on these, and it's going to be between the washer and the frame. So that is an area where you would not normally need to put any lubrication there, and I am only going to use it just to get it a little wet, and it'll stick better on the inside of the frame. So it'll kind of hold it there, hold its place while I put everything together. So I'm just going to put a real light swab of oil on there. And we're going to slide this back in there. And I'm going to use this and just kind of guide it over into its little recess. And make sure it's like even and sitting in there correctly. And then if I've done that right, I should be able to turn this over and it'll kind of stay up there. So then I'm going to do the other one and going to do it the same way. And again, this is not something that needs to be oiled. I'm just doing it to help me with reassembly. So I'm going to turn this over very carefully because I already have one stuck up there. And then I'm going to put this second one in. And I'm going to slide it over into its little recess so it can wait for the blade to be introduced. And this one's being kind of a pain. There we go. So now it's just kind of sitting there. Just go down a little bit more. There. So now it's ready as well. And I should be able to kind of gently put it in any position I want, and it's just going to stay there. So now I'm going to oil these bearings real quick. And this knife was pretty clean on the inside. So initial state of things aside, this knife is not in bad shape. As concerning as the unboxing was for me with this knife, but that was mostly just because of a careless seller. So we are going to take, and these will probably not hold themselves very well, even though I have some oil on them, because the oil on this bearing and on the balls are so small where it touches and interacts with the blade. It's not going to hold itself. So I'm going to go ahead and hold those while I introduce this blade back into the handle. So I'm going to relieve pressure on the lock bar, and I'm going to slide this back in and kind of eyeball it a little bit and get it pretty lined up. And then I'm going to oil the pivot, which is one of the most important parts of this whole oiling process, because this is where all the action happens. This is where the main friction point on this pivot system is. There's a couple of areas on a knife, like the pivot system sees the most friction. The blade stop bar pin sees the most shock. And then the detent ball sees, quite a bit of action in its traverse across its detent path, basically. And so those are the three biggies that I see on a knife. And so now we're going to work this pivot back in, and we had everything pretty lined up, I gotta say. So that pivot is all the way recessed into the handle. And so now it is captured effectively, and so it's not going to spin or anything like that. And so I'm just going to hold it because it will probably slip out. And then I'm going to put the other pivot screw back in. So this is, I gotta say, pretty easy, and so much easier than that Wee Knives One and Only, because that was a fun one to take apart, but it is very involved little pivot system. So we're going to take a second after we put this pocket clip back on, and we're going to tune it a little bit. Then I'm going to wipe it down. And then we're going to be out of here. So I'm really interested to see what that, what I do with that other pocket clip. I've actually had a couple of Chavez knives, and to be honest, I always sell them because I'm initially drawn to the knife itself and the way the pocket clip looks on there with a skull and everything else. And I was like, yeah, those are pretty neat. And so I kind of get drawn into it just for that reason. But then I get it, and it's kind of a really simple knife. It's blocky, it's, whatever it is, and it's got that clip on there. But I always end up thinking, for whatever reason, that if it wasn't for that big skull pocket clip, a Chavez knife, like a regular old Chavez knife, is a pretty simple knife, and it doesn't have a ton going for it, design-wise, in my opinion. It's not anything special. I like them, and I've bought a couple, but when it gets down to it, it's kind of a simple knife. But this knife actually is a little different because of, being an integral and the pivot system, and it's a little bit, cooler, and it's got DLC, and it's been customized. So this knife, this is one of the first Chavez knives that I've ever had that I really, really like and kind of intend to keep. So we're going to check the action, and this detent ball kind of engages right here, so I can tell where it's hitting that ramp. Yeah, it's right there. So you kind of have to get it past that for a really smooth, hydraulic shut. But once you get there, I gotta say, it is pretty smooth. Like, this is a nice knife to kind of actuate. I think it's a little loose, and so I'm going to increase it just a little bit. And again, bearings, you can pretty much crank down on to tune. It's not like a washer system. So I think I got it a little too much. So I'm gonna back it off just a hair. And I think we're gonna be close. And you really got to get past that detent, or get that detent up on the blade surface, which is kind of strange. A lot of knives you can break the detent, like right here, and then go ahead and bring it around and shut it. With this one, you have to have the blade up in, you know, a pretty far position. Like I can feel it right there. And so it's right there. So right here, if I were to raise it, it would just stay in that position. And I'd really have to shake it to get it to close. But if I get it where the detent ball is up on the surface of the blade, and that happens right here, where it's climbed its little ramp and it's up on the blade, then you can just turn it and it kind of closes. So it's not a problem at all. It's just from a smoothness, you know, fidget factor kind of thing. You know, it's a little strange. But anyway, we are going to, I got fingerprints all over this, and so we're going to kind of clean that up a little bit. And that, folks, is how you take apart a Redencion 229 integral and measure the bearings. So again, I appreciate you watching, and thanks very much.